In this lesson, we are going to learn about how South Carolina changed from a proprietary colony under the control of the 8 Lords Proprietors to a royal colony that was under the control of the king. Now, let's talk about some of the things we already learned. Once again, South Carolina was a proprietary colony. And proprietary colonies were for what purpose? Yes, they were for the purpose of profit or making money. And who was going to make this money was the 8 Lord Proprietors that were given Carolina by King Charles II. Now, before we go on in the lesson, let's review the government of Carolina. First of all, the early government of the Carolinas had a representative assembly that was called what? Here's a hint. GC. I really don't think you remember it because I talked about it for such a short amount of time. Yes, it was called the Grand Council. And of course, there was one person that was appointed by the proprietors, the governor. Now, the Grand Council was made up of 3 groups of people. One being representatives of the proprietors, 2 being representatives of the really rich in the society, the rich plantation owners, which were called what? It starts with an E. Yes, the elite. And C, the common people. Now, the government of the proprietors, or the proprietary government of the Carolinas, did not go extremely well for both the proprietors and the colonists that lived in the Carolinas. So basically, over a period of time, you had the proprietors eventually became angry at the colonists, and you had the colonists, those who received the land and paid quitrent to the proprietors, they became angry at the proprietors. Now, even before this switch, in the 1690s, the king took away the power of the proprietors to appoint the governor. And the king started to appoint the governor. The king appointed the governor because he started to realize the value of the Carolina colony. And it was to make the colony more royal, to better control the colony wealth, and to somewhat limit the colony's independence. Okay, so the king was already getting involved. Let's get back to the idea that proprietors were angry at the colonists, and the colonists were angry at the proprietors. Now, the proprietors became angry at the colonists whom they had given land to, because they started to feel that the colonists were disobedient. And they started to feel that they were making very little profit. Now, the colonists were mad at the proprietors mainly because they felt the proprietors were absentee landlords, and that the proprietors and the proprietary government, they collected rent but offered no protection. So the colonists were pretty much had to fend for themselves, and there was no protection against criminals, against hostile natives that may still be here, even against French and Spanish that may still have interests in part of the Carolinas and may attack. They felt that they were neglecting the colonists' needs. So the colonists knew they needed like some form of army to protect them, or a police force or something like that. So both of these groups are pretty much complaining to the king. The proprietors are going, man, we're not making any money off this colony you gave us, and we helped you reascend the throne, Charles II, and then these colonists are disobedient. And the colonists, they're writing letters to the king. Those proprietors, they're not being very good government for us. They're neglecting our needs. They just sit over in England, collect our quit rent, and don't provide us any protection or anything like that. So eventually, the king pays off the proprietors and buys Carolina back and makes it a royal colony. So the king pays the colonists off, or the proprietors off, says, you're right, perhaps it was a bad deal, perhaps it would just be better for everyone if I took over the Carolina colony. And the colonists were like, yay, he'll send the army. And they were happy because the king did send royal troops to help restore order that may have been lost and protect the colonists. And during this time is when the Carolina colony splits into North Carolina and South Carolina. Let's go ahead and go through the PowerPoint and show some of these ideas. So, we talked about early Carolina. There's a beautiful plantation house whose owners would probably have gotten their land. How that would have this plantation house? Yes, through the Headright method. The Headright method led to large plantations. So, this is about the shift of Carolina colony from proprietary to royal. South Carolina began as a proprietary government when land was given to the 8 lord proprietors. Now, to attract more settlers, they began sharing the political power, both with the elite and with the common people. Carolina, of course, developed a political elite consisting of plantation owners. Just as in other colonies, Carolina had a legislative assembly to make laws, including tax laws, for the colony. Most English colonies had a bicameral assembly, or a 2-house legislative branch. So, the Carolina also had a 2-house legislative branch, which today in the United States, we also have a 2-house legislative branch. Now, most of these assemblies were modeled after Parliament, which Parliament had a House of Lords and a House of Commons. Carolina would also have a House of Commons. I don't think they called the upper house the House of Lords, though. So, the Grand Council was bicameral. I don't know, but if you picture, let's picture as we have 2 groups here. We have the House of Lords on the bottom, or let's just call it the House of Elite and Royal. And then we'll have the House of Commons with the common people being represented back here. Now, the proprietors and elite had greater representation compared to the common people. So perhaps we should move our line up here and give more of these people to the elite and proprietors. The Grand Council thought everyone should have a voice, even if representation would not be proportional. Now, in South Carolina, the Low Country had more representation than the Back Country. So, the Low Country is the area surrounding Charleston. Geographically, it's a relatively small amount of the state, or small part of the state. However, and they actually had less population. They had more representation. So, all these people perhaps were representing the Low Country. That's called a disproportionate number of representatives. Then we have where all the common people are, which we're going to learn about in future lessons. Most common farmers, etc., they were in the back country and the up country. There were not large plantations in the back country and up country. Those were mostly in the Low Country by Charlestown. Well, the Green actually had more people, but they were smaller farmers. They had, even though they had more people, they had less representation in the Grand Council. So, by the 1600s, the king appointed the governor and the colony became more royal. We talked about why the king did so: to control the wealth, to limit the independence, and just to make the colony more royal. The growing tensions eventually would result in the king taking over control. The colonists were mad because they felt neglected by the absentee landlord who collected rent but gave no protection. The lower proprietors thought the colonists were being disobedient and they were making little profit. So, the king offers to pay off the proprietors and buy South Carolina back from them and make it royal. Now, the council protested to the king, and the king reached a financial agreement with the proprietors. South Carolina becomes a royal colony. This allowed for the splitting of the Carolinas into two. So it went from all this to, I'm not sure if this, it definitely was that, but it might have been more like that, all of that still. Now, South Carolina continued to have self-government through through assembly, but had a governor appointed by a king. And I'm going to talk about this. The royal governor was limited, though, because the assemblies controlled the taxes that paid the governor's salary. So, the royal governor, the king's man, the General Assembly kind of had some control over him. Because if he tried to speak up and say, wait, I don't like what y'all are doing, they're like, well, if you don't like what we're doing, we kind of can lower your salary, perhaps. So his power was a little bit limited because they had him sort of blackmailed, the word is. They had some control over him, some leverage, because they controlled his money. Let's get to the last part. So, a repeat of what was said on the PowerPoint, but The royal colony government consisted of a governor that was appointed by the king, and they changed the name of the Grand Council to the General Assembly. Now, back to that part about the royal governor, the king's man. He did not have that much power because the General Assembly, which was made up of South Carolina people, or Carolina people, they had control over him because they pretty much had control of his salary. Because the General Assembly controlled taxes that paid the governor's salary. It's kind of like leverage or perhaps even blackmail. Hey, wait, my king wouldn't like that. Well, do you like your salary? Yeah, then you better keep your mouth closed. All right, now South Carolina would experience some positive economic and political things because of this change from proprietary to royal. Now, some of these economic things that were good for the Carolinas was, what are extra payments called? Starts with an S, like they gave for indigo and sometimes rice. Yes, they are called subsidies. There would be subsidies for what came from pine trees and helped keep ships watertight. Yes, naval stores. There would be subsidies given for naval stores after South Carolina becomes a royal colony. 2, there would be townships created in the backcountry of the Carolinas, which would help pave the way for organized government. 3, they allowed the Carolina colony to trade rice with any foreign colony. So, rice could be sold directly to foreign countries. So before, under the policy of salutary neglect, rice was really supposed to be sold all to England, although not that, I messed up. The policy of the enumerated list said all rice should be sold directly to England. The salutary neglect said, we're going to let you trade with other colonies, but we're really not supposed to. But now, after it becomes a royal colony, rice is allowed to be sold to foreign countries directly, and it becomes a policy, not just salutary neglect. Now, when there's townships created in the backcountry, this attracts more of poor farmers that would not be rich plantation owners, but they would be farmers who grew mostly what they need to survive, called subsistence farmers, who grew what they need for their family to survive, and if there was a surplus, they sold it. They were not wealthy plantation owners. They were more of common people who were just trying to make a living. So, after the switch from proprietary to royal, let's talk about these economic benefits again. The economic benefits would be: English government gave subsidies for naval stores. Townships are created in the backcountry. One that is not mentioned is rice was allowed to be traded with any foreign country, and perhaps an effect of number 2, farmers moved to the backcountry to establish subsistence farms. This ends the lesson today. In the future lesson, we're going to learn more about the difference between the backcountry and the backcountry and the low country, and about how the backcountry wasn't being protected by the low country, so they had to form a citizen group to take the law into their own hands, called the regulators. Until then, thank you for listening. I hope you did well.